The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Willow Creek, Arizona territory, as it had done every day since the town sprouted from the desert like a stubborn weed. From her bedroom window on the second floor of the Maddox mansion, Evelyn watched the familiar ritual of dawn breaking over the harsh landscape. The year was 1885, and at 23, she had seen this same view nearly every morning of her life. The house stood apart from the rest of the town, both in location and grandeur, built of imported limestone that gleamed white against the red earth. It was a monument to her father's success as a circuit judge. Judge Cornelius Maddox had brought law to the lawless, or so he liked to remind anyone who would listen. The mansion's wraparound porch, with its ornate columns and hanging ferns struggling against the desert heat, spoke of Eastern sensibilities stubbornly imposed upon Western soil. Evelyn dressed carefully in a modest gray dress, her fingers working the buttons with practiced ease. The fabric was fine, but plain. Her father disapproved of ostentation, believing it unseemly for a judge's daughter to draw undue attention. She pinned her dark hair into a severe bun, checking her reflection in the gilt-framed mirror. The face that looked back at her was pleasant enough, with clear green eyes and high cheekbones, but marked by a certain weariness that came from years of living under her father's rigid expectations. Downstairs, the breakfast table was set with military precision. Judge Maddox sat at the head, reading the Territorial Gazette while their housekeeper, Mrs. Donnelly, poured coffee from a silver pot. The judge didn't look up as Evelyn took her seat. "There's to be a hanging today," he announced, his voice carrying the same dispassionate tone he used in the courtroom. "One of Jesse Crow's men, Tom Larkin, found guilty of murdering that shopkeeper last month." Evelyn's hand paused halfway to her teacup. "Must it be public, Father? Justice must be seen to be done," Judge Maddox replied, finally raising his steel-gray eyes to meet hers. "The people need to understand that lawlessness has consequences. That gang has terrorized this territory for too long." "And Jesse Crow himself?" Evelyn asked quietly. Her father's jaw tightened. "Still at large, but his day will come. Mark my words. Daughter, I'll see him swing before the year is out." The hanging was scheduled for noon, when the sun would be at its most merciless. Evelyn had no intention of attending, but as the morning wore on, she found herself drawn to the window again and again. From the mansion's elevated position, she could see the gallows being erected in the town square, could watch the crowd beginning to gather like vultures around carrion. By 11:30, the heat had become oppressive. Evelyn told Mrs. Donnelly she needed air and slipped out through the back garden. She had no destination in mind, only a vague desire to be away from the house and its suffocating atmosphere of righteous certainty. Her feet carried her along the edge of town, past the weathered buildings and false-fronted shops, until she found herself on a small rise overlooking the square. She hadn't meant to come here, yet here she was, hidden in the shadow of a large cottonwood tree, with a clear view of the proceedings below. The crowd had swelled to several hundred people. Men in dusty work clothes stood alongside women clutching parasols against the sun. Children darted between the adults, playing tag as if this were a county fair rather than an execution. On the platform, Sheriff McKenna tested the trap door while the hangman checked his rope. Then they brought out Tom Larkin. He was younger than Evelyn had expected, perhaps 25, with sandy hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the fear etched into every line. His hands were bound behind his back, and he stumbled as the deputies pushed him forward. The crowd fell silent. Judge Maddox ascended the platform, his black coat making him look like a crow among pigeons. He unfolded a paper and began to read in his courtroom voice. "Thomas James Larkin, having been found guilty of murder in the first degree by a jury of your peers, you are hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on your soul." Larkin's lips moved, but Evelyn couldn't hear his words from her distant perch. The hangman positioned the noose, and Sheriff McKenna asked if the condemned had any last words. Larkin shook his head, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for a familiar face. Evelyn turned away, pressing her back against the rough bark of the cottonwood. She couldn't watch, but she couldn't block out the sound, the creak of the trap door, the collective gasp of the crowd, the terrible silence that followed. When she finally forced herself to look again, Tom Larkin's body swayed gently in the hot breeze, and the crowd was already beginning to disperse. Justice had been done, as her father would say. Another member of the Crow gang had paid the price for his crimes. She was about to leave when she noticed a lone rider on the opposite ridge, sitting motionless on a black horse. Even from this distance, something about the figure's stillness caught her attention. The rider watched for another moment, then wheeled his mount around and disappeared into the desert haze. That evening, dinner at the Maddox house was even more somber than usual. Evelyn pushed her food around her plate while her father expounded on the day's events. "A good day for justice," he declared, cutting into his beef with surgical precision. One less outlaw plaguing honest folk. "Was he really so terrible, this Tom Larkin?" Evelyn asked. Her father's fork paused midway to his mouth. "He murdered Samuel Henderson in cold blood. Shot him for the contents of his cash register, $43.60. Is that not terrible enough for you? I only wondered, was there no doubt, no possibility of—" The evidence was clear. Judge Maddox interrupted. "Witnesses placed him at the scene. The gun was found in his possession. Justice is not about doubt. Evelyn, it's about truth." After dinner, Evelyn retired to the parlor while her father retreated to his study. She tried to focus on her needlework, but her hands were unsteady, and she kept having to pull out stitches. The image of Tom Larkin's frightened face wouldn't leave her mind. Near 10 o'clock, she heard voices from her father's study. The door was slightly ajar, and she recognized the second voice as belonging to Marshal James Holt. Unable to help herself, she crept closer. "Need to move fast," Marshal Holt was saying. "My informants tell me the gang is planning something in retaliation for today. Let them come." Her father replied, "We're ready for them." "It's not just that. Cornelius, I've been working on something, a way to bring down the whole operation. But I need leverage." "What kind of leverage?" There was a pause. Then Marshal Holt spoke again, his voice lower. "Your daughter, she witnessed the Henderson murder, didn't she? Saw Larkin leaving the store." Evelyn's blood ran cold. She had been there that day, had seen a man run from Henderson's shop, but in the chaos and darkness, she couldn't have sworn to his identity. She mentioned seeing someone, her father admitted, but she wasn't certain. "Doesn't matter. If she testifies that it was Larkin, we can use that to pressure the rest of the gang. They won't know she's uncertain. We can make them believe we have an unimpeachable witness who can identify them all." "You want to use Evelyn as bait?" "Not bait. Insurance. We'll protect her, of course. Move her to the safe house outside town. Post guards. But if word gets out that Judge Maddox's daughter is our star witness for the upcoming trials—" Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. They were planning to use her, to put a target on her back in their war against Jesse Crow's gang. "I don't like it," her father said after a long moment. "You don't have to like it," Marshal Holt replied, "but you know it's our best chance. The gang's been ghosts for 2 years. This could finally give us the edge we need. I'll consider it." "Don't consider too long. Word travels fast in the territory. If we're going to do this, we need to move her tomorrow night." Evelyn fled back to the parlor, her mind racing. She barely had time to compose herself before her father emerged from his study, escorting Marshal Holt to the door. The marshal tipped his hat to her as he passed. "Miss Maddox, pleasant evening to you." She managed a nod, not trusting her voice. After he left, her father stood in the parlor doorway, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Evelyn, we need to discuss something." "Yes." "Father?" He crossed to the window, gazing out at the darkened town. "You may have noticed that these are dangerous times. The lawless element grows bolder by the day." "I understand." "Do you?" He turned to face her. "Marshal Holt believes it would be wise for you to spend some time at the Carson place outside town, for your safety." The Carson place was an abandoned homestead 3 miles north, occasionally used by the Marshal's office for various purposes. Evelyn had heard whispers about witnesses being hidden there before trials. "When?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Tomorrow night. You'll pack only the essentials. Mrs. Donnelly will help you. And if I refuse," her father's expression hardened, "you won't. You're my daughter, and you'll do your duty to this family and to justice. The arrangements are already made." Evelyn stood, her needlework falling forgotten to the floor. "My duty? To be used as bait for outlaws, to help bring murderers to justice," he corrected. "You saw Tom Larkin that night. Your testimony—" "I saw a man in the darkness," Evelyn interrupted, surprising them both with her vehemence. "I couldn't swear to his face, and you know it." "You saw enough. And sometimes, daughter, we must be certain even when certainty eludes us, for the greater good." The words hung between them like a challenge. Evelyn met her father's gaze steadily, seeing in it the same implacable will that had sent Tom Larkin to the gallows that morning. "I'll pack my things," she said quietly, and fled to her room. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in her bed, listening to the familiar creaks of the house and the distant howl of coyotes in the desert. Through her window, stars glittered in the vast Arizona sky, indifferent to human notions of justice and duty. Tomorrow night, she would leave this house for an uncertain future. She would become a pawn in a game between lawmen and outlaws. Her life wagered on her father's rigid principles. The thought terrified her. But beneath the fear was something else, a strange anticipation, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment, for something to shatter the suffocating predictability of her existence. In the darkness, she remembered the lone rider on the ridge, watching the hanging with such stillness. She wondered who he was, what thoughts had passed through his mind as he witnessed his compatriot's death. She wondered if he was out there now, planning retribution. She wondered if she would ever feel safe again. The storm came without warning, as desert storms often do. One moment the night sky was clear, stars scattered like silver dust across black velvet, and the next, thunder rolled across the mountains like artillery fire. Lightning illuminated the Carson house in stark, momentary flashes, revealing its weathered boards and sagging porch to Evelyn's anxious eyes. She had been at the safe house for 3 days now, with only Marshal Holt's deputy, a young man named Daniel Briggs, for company. The isolation was wearing on her nerves. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls, made her heart race. "Storm's getting worse," Deputy Briggs observed from his post by the front window. He was barely 20, with an earnest face and hands that seemed too large for his wrists. "Haven't seen one like this in months." Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Perhaps we should light more lamps." "No, ma'am. Orders are to keep the house dark as possible. Don't want to advertise we're here." Another crack of thunder shook the windows. Rain began to lash against the roof, a sudden deluge that turned the desert into a temporary sea. Evelyn moved to the opposite window, peering out at the storm-tossed landscape. In the brief illumination of a lightning, she could see the arroyos beginning to fill with rushing water. "Deputy Briggs," she began, then stopped. Something had moved out there in the darkness, or had it been just shadow and rain? "What is it, Miss Maddox? I thought I saw—" She shook her head. "It's nothing. The storm is playing tricks." But Deputy Briggs was already at her side, squinting through the rain-streaked glass. "Where?" "By the tool shed. But truly, it was probably just—" The front door exploded inward with such force that it slammed against the wall. Rain and wind howled into the room, and with them came a figure in a black duster, water streaming from the brim of his hat. Deputy Briggs fumbled for his pistol, but the intruder was faster. In one fluid motion, he drew and fired, the gun bucking in his hand with a flash of lightning. Briggs cried out and fell, clutching his shoulder. His pistol skittered across the floor. "Don't!" the stranger said as Evelyn lunged for the weapon. His voice was low, roughened by whiskey or weather, or both. "Step away from the gun, ma'am." In the next lightning flash, she saw his face clearly for the first time. Angular features, a day's worth of stubble, and eyes the color of winter sky. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin. This was Jesse Crow. She knew it with absolute certainty, though she'd never seen him before. "You're him," she breathed. "I am." He moved into the room, closing the ruined door behind him as best he could. Water pooled around his boots. "And you're the judge's daughter, the witness." "I'm not—" She stopped herself. What was the point of denying it? Jesse Crow kicked Briggs's gun into the corner, then knelt beside the wounded deputy. His movements were economical, practiced. "Shoulder wound," he announced after a brief examination. "Clean through. You'll live, boy, if you don't do anything stupid. You're under arrest." Briggs managed through gritted teeth. Jesse almost smiled. "Sure I am." He stood, turning his attention back to Evelyn. "Get your things. We're leaving. I'm not going anywhere with you." "You are, though." His tone was conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "See, Marshal Holt's been spreading word that you're going to testify against my boys. Says you saw everything, can identify everyone. Made you a target. Miss Maddox." "So you've come to kill me?" She was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead." He moved to the window, checking the storm. "I'm here to keep you alive." "There's others coming. Bounty hunters, rival gangs, folks who'd hurt you just to spite your father. This safe house isn't safe anymore." "You expect me to believe you're trying to protect me?" He turned back to her, and in the dim light, she caught something unexpected in his expression. Weariness, perhaps even regret. "I expect you to use your head. Stay here, and you're dead by morning. Come with me, and you've got a chance. Marshal Holt's the one who painted a target on your back." Jesse's voice hardened. "Now get your things, or I'll throw you over my shoulder and carry you out. Your choice." Evelyn looked at Deputy Briggs, who was trying to sit up despite his wound. "What about him?" "He'll be fine. Someone will come looking when he doesn't report in." Jesse pulled out a pocket watch, checking the time. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before the others figure out the storm's good cover." "You coming willingly, or do I have to get unpleasant?" There was no real choice. Evelyn gathered her few possessions. A change of clothes, her mother's silver brush, the small amount of money she'd hidden in her boot. Her hands shook as she stuffed everything into a carpet bag. Jesse had tied a rough bandage around Briggs's shoulder and propped him against the wall. "Tell Holt that Jesse Crow has his witness," he said to the deputy. "Tell him if he wants her back safe, he'll call off the dogs. He'll hunt you down." Briggs gasped. "He's been trying for 2 years. How's that working out?" Jesse moved to the door. "Ready, Miss Maddox?" She wasn't. Couldn't possibly be. But she nodded. Jesse led her out into the storm, where 2 horses waited, their reins tied to the porch rail. He helped her mount. She rode astride. Propriety be damned in these conditions. Then swung up onto his own horse, a magnificent black stallion that seemed unbothered by the weather. They rode hard through the rain, leaving the Carson house behind. Lightning provided intermittent glimpses of the terrain rocky outcroppings, scattered cacti, the swollen rush of normally dry washes. Evelyn clung to her saddle horn, trusting her horse to follow Jesse's lead. Within minutes, she was soaked through, her dress plastered to her skin, her carefully pinned hair hanging in wet strings. The rain was cold, shockingly so after the day's heat, and she began to shiver violently. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, the storm gradually moving east, leaving them in its dripping wake. Jesse finally slowed, guiding them into a narrow canyon she hadn't even seen in the darkness. The walls rose on either side, blocking out most of the sky. "Where are we going?" she called out, her voice hoarse. "Somewhere safe," was all he said. The canyon twisted and turned, sometimes barely wide enough for the horses to pass through. Just when Evelyn thought they must be lost, it opened into a wider space, a natural chamber in the rock. protected by an overhang. Jessie dismounted and helped her down, her legs nearly buckling after the hard ride. "Get inside," he ordered, leading the horses under the overhang. "There's dry wood stacked in the back. Get a fire going." I've never—" He paused in unsaddling his horse, looking at her with something like amusement. "Never built a fire? What do they teach judges' daughters? Latin, needlepoint, how to pour tea." She was too cold and miserable to be embarrassed. Not wilderness survival. He finished with the horses, then brushed past her into the cave. She followed, watching as he efficiently arranged kindling and struck a match. Within minutes, a small fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. "Strip," he said, not looking at her. "I beg your pardon." "Your clothes are soaked. You'll catch your death." He was already shrugging out of his duster, revealing a worn but dry shirt beneath. "There's blankets in my saddlebags. Change into something dry or sit there and freeze. Up to you." He turned his back, busying himself with the fire. Evelyn hesitated. Then practicality won out over modesty. She fumbled with her sodden buttons, peeling off the wet dress and undergarments, wrapping herself quickly in one of the rough wool blankets. Her spare clothes were damp but not soaked through. She dressed hastily while Jessie kept his back turned. "Decent," she said quietly. He turned around, and she saw he'd changed his shirt as well. In the firelight, the scar on his face seemed less harsh, and she realized he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30. "No more. Sit by the fire," he said. "Get warm." She did, extending her hands toward the flames. The cave was surprisingly comfortable. She realized. Blankets folded in one corner, supplies stacked neatly against the wall. "You've been here before, one of many such places." He settled on the opposite side of the fire, checking his revolver before setting it within easy reach. "A man in my line of work needs bolt holes. Your line of work, you mean outlawry. I mean survival." His eyes met hers across the fire. "Your father hanged Tom Larkin 3 days ago. Tom was 19 years old. Joined up with us because the mines killed his father and the company store took everything else. That's outlawry to you?" "He killed Samuel Henderson." "Did he?" Jessie pulled out a flask, took a swig, offered it to her. When she shook her head, he shrugged. "You sure about that? You were there, weren't you? The star witness?" Evelyn was silent for a long moment. "I saw someone running from the store." "In the dark, from across the street. But you're sure it was Tom?" The evidence was a gun planted in his saddlebag and witnesses who'd say anything to collect the bounty." Jessie's voice was bitter. "Your father needed someone to hang, and Tom was convenient." "That's not true. My father believes in justice. Your father believes in order. Not the same thing." He leaned back against the cave wall. "Tom couldn't have killed Henderson. He was with me that night, 20 miles away, helping a family whose well had gone dry. But alibis from outlaws don't count for much in Judge Maddox's court." The fire crackled between them. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd been taught, seemed to be shifting like sand beneath her feet. "Why did you take me?" she asked finally. "Really?" Jessie was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because using you as bait was Holt's idea, not yours. Because you're not responsible for your father's sins. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I've seen what happens to women caught in the crossfire of this war. It's not pretty. So you're protecting me out of nobility?" "I'm protecting you because it's the smart play. Holt wants you as a weapon against us. Without you, his plan falls apart." He met her eyes again. "Don't mistake necessity for kindness, Miss Maddox." But there was something in his voice that belied the harsh words. Evelyn studied him across the fire. This man she'd been taught to fear and hate. He didn't look like a monster. He looked tired, wary, carrying weights she couldn't begin to understand. "What happens now?" she asked. Now we wait for the storm to pass completely. Then we keep moving. I've got to get you somewhere Holt won't think to look while I figure out how to resolve this mess. And then you go free, assuming your father and Holt don't do something stupid first." The fire had warmed the small space, and exhaustion was catching up with her. Evelyn's eyelids grew heavy despite her efforts to stay alert. "Sleep," Jesse said, not unkindly. "I'll keep watch." "How do I know you won't? If I wanted to hurt you, would I have bothered drying you off first?" He pulled his hat low over his eyes. "Sleep, Miss Maddox. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She wanted to protest, to stay awake and vigilant, but her body betrayed her. Curled near the fire, wrapped in the rough blanket that smelled of horse and leather and smoke, she drifted into uneasy sleep. Her last conscious thought was how strange it was that she felt safer here, in this cave with an outlaw, than she had in the Marshal's safe house. It was a dangerous thought, a treacherous thought, but in the moment before sleep claimed her, she couldn't quite bring herself to regret it. Jesse Crow sat silent in the firelight, keeping watch over the judge's daughter, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Dawn came slowly to the canyon, painting the rocks in shades of rose and gold. Evelyn woke to find Jesse already up, tending to the horses. The fire had died to embers, and the morning air carried a chill that made her pull the blanket tighter. "There's coffee," he said without turning around, "and some biscuits that aren't too stale." She found the pot warming by the coals, poured herself a tin cup of the bitter brew. It was nothing like the delicate tea service at home, but it was hot and strong, and she was grateful for it. "We need to move soon," Jesse continued, checking his horse's hooves. "This place is safe enough, but staying in one spot too long is asking for trouble." They broke their simple camp and rode out as the sun climbed higher. The storm had transformed the desert, bringing out colors Evelyn had never noticed before. The sage seemed greener, the rocks more vivid. Barrel cacti wore crowns of yellow flowers, and the air smelled clean and new. They rode in relative silence through the morning, Jesse leading them along paths that seemed invisible to Evelyn's eyes. He knew this land intimately. She realized every canyon and wash, every hidden spring and shelter. Near midday, they stopped to rest the horses in the shade of a massive cottonwood. Jesse handed her a canteen, watching as she drank. "You're not what I expected," he said suddenly. "What did you expect?" A pampered princess who'd faint at the first sign of hardship, maybe cry for her daddy. He smiled slightly. "You haven't done either." "The day is young," Evelyn replied, surprised to find herself almost returning his smile. "What made you become what you are?" His expression shuddered. "That's a long story. We appear to have time." Jesse was quiet for a moment, then began to speak, his voice steady but distant. "I was 14 when the war ended. My father died at Antietam. My mother of grief not long after. The state of Missouri decided I'd be better off in the Bardstown boys' home." He paused to light a cigarette, the smoke curling up in the still air. "You ever been to an orphanage, Miss Maddox? It's not a place for children. It's a place where they try to beat the childhood out of you, make you useful, compliant. You ran away. After 2 years of hell, joined up with a cattle drive heading to Kansas. Learned to ride, to rope, to shoot. Honest work." His jaw tightened. "Till the big ranchers decided they didn't like competition. They hired guns to run us off, killed half the crew. That's when I learned that the law only protects those who can afford it." Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the story of villainy she'd expected. "That doesn't excuse—" "I'm not looking for excuses." He ground out the cigarette. "Just explaining how a boy becomes what you see. Every choice I made seemed right at the time, or at least necessary. And here we are." "Here we are," she echoed softly. They mounted up again, riding through increasingly rough terrain. By late afternoon, Evelyn was sore in muscles she didn't know she had. When Jesse finally called a halt near a small spring, she nearly fell off her horse in relief. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced, surveying the area. Good sightlines, fresh water, some shelter. As he set up camp with his usual efficiency, Evelyn tried to make herself useful, gathering what she thought was firewood. Jesse looked at her collection and shook his head. "Half of that's green wood. It'll smoke something fierce. This here's greasewood. Burns too hot and fast. You want the dead mesquite, like this." He showed her how to identify good firewood, how to clear a proper fire circle, how to arrange the kindling. She was a quick study, he noted with approval, not afraid to get her hands dirty. As darkness fell and they sat by their small fire, the desert came alive with the night sounds, coyotes yipping in the distance, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. Evelyn found herself relaxing despite the circumstances. "Tell me about Tom Larkin," she said quietly. "The real story." Jesse poked at the fire with a stick. Tom was just a kid trying to get by. His folks died in a mine cave-in when he was 12. Company said it was an act of God. Refused to pay anything out. Tom tried to work the mines himself, but a boy can't earn enough to live on. He looked up at the stars beginning to emerge. He started stealing food. Little things. Got caught. Did 6 months on a chain gang. Came out harder, angrier. That's when he found us. "Your gang. My family," Jesse corrected. "Men who'd been chewed up and spit out by a system that sees them as expendable. We look after each other. Take what we need to survive." "And Samuel Henderson. Did Tom—" "I told you. Tom was with me that night." Jesse's voice was firm. "Henderson was killed by Jake Morrison, one of Holt's paid informants. They had a dispute over money, but Morrison pointed the finger at Tom, and that was that." Evelyn stared into the fire, trying to reconcile this version of events with everything she'd believed. "If that's true, why didn't you come forward?" "With what? My word against a Marshal's informant? In your father's court?" Jesse laughed bitterly. "Might as well put the rope around my own neck." A cold wind swept down from the mountains, making Evelyn shiver. Without thinking, Jesse moved closer, adding wood to the fire. Their shoulders almost touched. "I watched the hanging," he said suddenly. "From the ridge. Couldn't save him, but I could bear witness. He died brave. Tom did." "I'm sorry," Evelyn whispered, and meant it. Jesse looked at her sharply. "Don't apologize for things that aren't your doing. You're not responsible for your father any more than I am for mine." They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned lower. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the complete upending of her orderly life, Evelyn felt strangely at peace. There was something honest about this existence, stripped of pretense and social niceties. "You should sleep," Jesse said eventually. "We've got hard riding tomorrow." She spread her blanket near the fire, using her carpet bag as a makeshift pillow. Jesse took up his position against a boulder, rifle across his knees. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked. "When it's safe, which isn't often. That's no way to live. It's the only way I know." He pulled his hat low. "Go to sleep, Miss Maddox." But sleep wouldn't come. Evelyn lay watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about the strange turns her life had taken. 3 days ago, she'd been the dutiful daughter, accepting her role in her father's vision of justice. Now she was camping in the wilderness with the very man her father had sworn to hang. "Jesse?" she called softly. "What?" "What's your real plan? You can't keep me out here forever." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I've got friends in New Mexico territory. Good people who'll help you start fresh if that's what you want. Or I can negotiate with Holt. Try to trade your safety for something he wants." "What does he want?" "Me, mostly. Been a thorn in his side for years." Evelyn sat up, alarmed. "You can't go to sleep," he said firmly. "Nothing's decided yet." But she couldn't let it go. "Why do you care what happens to me? Really?" In the dying firelight, she saw him shift, considering his answer. "Maybe because I'm tired of seeing innocent people ground up by men like your father and Holt. Maybe because you looked at Tom like he was human, not just another outlaw. Or maybe—" He trailed off. "Maybe what? Maybe I'm just a fool. Wouldn't be the first time." His voice carried a note of self-mockery. Now, will you please go to sleep before I tie you up and gag you?" Despite the threat. Evelyn smiled. She lay back down, pulling the blanket to her chin. "Good night, Jesse." "Good night, Evelyn." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about it made her heart skip. Dangerous, she told herself. This man is dangerous, no matter how noble his motives might seem. But as sleep finally claimed her, she found herself feeling safer than she had in years. She woke once in the night to find Jesse had moved closer to the fire, close enough that she could see his face in the dim light. He looked younger in sleep. The hard lines softened, the wariness gone. Without thinking, she reached out, almost touching the scar on his face before catching herself. What was she doing? This man was an outlaw, wanted by the law, enemy to everything her father represented. And yet he'd shown her more genuine kindness in 2 days than she'd received in years of proper society. He'd risked his life to protect her, asked for nothing in return, treated her like a person rather than a pawn or a possession. The next morning brought new challenges. As they broke camp, Jesse's manner was tense, alert. He studied the horizon constantly, one hand never far from his gun. "Trouble?" Evelyn asked. "Maybe. Saw dust in the distance earlier. Could be nothing. Could be riders." They pushed harder that day, Jesse leading them through increasingly difficult terrain. By afternoon, Evelyn's initial assessment proved correct. She could see the dust cloud too, closer now, following their general direction. "How many?" she asked. 3, maybe 4 riders, moving fast but not pushing their horses to death. Professionals. Bounty hunters? Most likely. The price on my head would set a man up for life. He glanced at her. "They won't care that you're with me willingly. To them, you're just extra leverage." They rode in tense silence, Jesse constantly checking their back trail. As the sun began to sink, he made a decision, turning them toward a cluster of rocks and scrub. "We'll make our stand here if we have to," he said, helping her dismount. "Can you shoot?" No." He pressed a small revolver into her hands. "Point and squeeze. Don't jerk the trigger. And only if they get past me." "Jesse." No arguments. He positioned himself behind a boulder, rifle ready. "Stay down and stay quiet." The riders came into view just as the sun touched the horizon. 4 men in trail-worn clothes, bristling with weapons. They approached cautiously, spreading out in a semicircle. "Jesse Crow," one called out. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody has to die." "Including the woman?" Jesse called back. "That's the judge's daughter, ain't it? She'll be fine. It's you we want." Jesse laughed harshly. "Sure she will. Just like all the other women you boys have kept safe. I wasn't born yesterday." "Mitchell." The lead rider. Mitchell spat tobacco juice. "Then we do this the hard way." The first shot came without warning, sparking off the rock inches from Jesse's head. He returned fire, the rifle cracking sharply in the evening air. Evelyn pressed herself against the ground, heart pounding, the revolver heavy in her trembling hands. The firefight was brief but intense. Jesse moved like a man born to combat, calm and deadly accurate. One rider fell, then another. The remaining 2 pulled back, seeking better cover. "You're outnumbered." "Crow!" Mitchell shouted. "More men coming. You can't protect her forever." "Don't have to," Jesse replied. "Just long enough." Long enough for what? Evelyn wondered. But there was no time to ask. The bounty hunters were moving again, trying to flank their position. Jesse tracked them, patient as a hunter, waiting for the right moment. It came when one man got overconfident, exposing himself for a clear shot at what he thought was Jesse's position. Jesse had anticipated this, had already moved, and his shot took the man's center mass. He fell without a sound. Mitchell, now alone, seemed to reconsider his options. "This ain't over, Crow!" he yelled, already backing toward his horse. "That bounty's too good to pass up." He fled into the gathering darkness, leaving his dead companions behind. Jesse waited a long count of 100 before lowering his rifle. "It's done," he said quietly. For now. Evelyn realized she was still gripping the revolver with white knuckles, gently. Jesse took it from her hands. "You did good," he said. "Stayed calm. Stayed put. Not everyone could do that. You killed them." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "They would have killed us, or worse." He began reloading his weapons with practiced movements. "This is the world you're in now, Evelyn. The world your father pretends doesn't exist when he's handing down his judgments from on high." She wanted to argue, to defend her father, to pretend there had been another choice, but the cooling bodies of the bounty hunters made such protests impossible. This was survival, raw and immediate, without the comfortable abstractions of law and order. "We can't stay here," Jesse continued. "Mitchell will be back with more men. We need to move, take advantage of the darkness." They rode through the night, guided by stars and Jesse's uncanny knowledge of the land. Evelyn dozed in the saddle, exhausted by fear and adrenaline. She woke to find Jesse's arm around her, keeping her from falling. "Sorry," she mumbled. "Don't be. You're doing better than most would." His voice was kind. "We're almost there." "Where?" "Somewhere safe. Actually safe this time." As dawn broke, they descended into a hidden valley she wouldn't have believed existed. A small adobe house sat beside a spring-fed pool, surrounded by cottonwoods and willows. Smoke rose from the chimney, and an elderly Mexican woman emerged as they approached. "Jesse!" she called, her weathered face creasing in a smile. "Mijo, you bring trouble to my door again?" "Always. Rosa." Jesse dismounted, helping Evelyn down. "This is Miss Maddox. She needs sanctuary." Rosa's keen eyes assessed Evelyn, taking in her disheveled appearance and exhausted face. "Say, I see. Come, child. You need food and rest, and a bath, I think." As Rosa led Evelyn inside, chattering in a mix of Spanish and English, Jesse caught her arm gently. "You'll be safe here," he said. "Rosa's good people. She'll look after you while I figure out our next move." "You're leaving?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Not going far, but there are things I need to arrange, people I need to contact. Trust Rosa. Trust me." Before she could respond, he was gone, leading the horses to a small corral behind the house. Evelyn watched him go, then followed Rosa inside, into warmth and safety and the promise of that long-awaited bath. But even as she sank into the hot water Rosa had prepared, washing away the dust and fear of the past days, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about Jesse Crow, about the way he'd said her name in the darkness, about the careful distance he maintained even as he protected her, about the growing certainty that her life would never be the same again. The journey to New Mexico territory took them through landscapes Evelyn had only imagined. They left Rosa's sanctuary after 3 days, Jesse having returned with supplies and intelligence about the routes ahead. The old woman had pressed food into their saddlebags and blessed them both, her knowing eyes lingering on the careful distance Jesse maintained from Evelyn. They rode through painted deserts where the earth showed every shade from crimson to violet, through forests of towering pines that seemed to scrape the sky, across meadows where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion. Each night they camped under stars so bright they seemed within reach, and each day brought new wonders. Jesse proved to be an unexpected teacher, sharing his knowledge of the land with quiet enthusiasm. He showed her how to find water by watching the flight of birds, how to read weather in the shape of clouds, how to move silently through the brush. Evelyn absorbed it all, feeling more alive than she had in 23 years of proper existence. On their 5th day out from Rosa's, they stopped in the small town of Cedar Ridge to resupply. It was barely more than a handful of buildings clustered around a dusty main street, but it had what they needed: a general store, a blacksmith, and, most importantly, anonymity. "We're Mr. and Mrs. Garrett," Jesse told her as they approached. "Traveling to visit family in Santa Fe. Keep your bonnet low and let me do the talking." Evelyn's heart skipped at the casual way he said Mrs. Garrett, but she merely nodded. They'd need a convincing act to avoid suspicion. In the general store, Jesse played his part perfectly, the attentive husband, helping his wife select fabric and provisions. When he placed his hand on the small of her back to guide her past a display, Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You need a new dress," he murmured. "That one's about done for." He was right. Her gray dress, once so proper and modest, was now travel-stained and torn in places. She selected a simple calico in blue and white, practical for riding. Along with other necessities, the storekeeper's wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, offered the use of a back room for Evelyn to change. "Can't have you traveling in those torn things," she said. "Though I must say, your husband takes good care of you. Not all men would think of such necessities." Evelyn glanced at Jesse, who was examining ammunition with studied casualness. "Yes," she said softly. "He's very thoughtful." When she emerged in the new dress, Jesse's expression shifted for just a moment, something warm and appreciative flashing in his eyes before he looked away. "Better," was all he said, but his voice was rougher than usual. They took a room at the small boarding house, maintaining their cover as a married couple. The proprietress, Mrs. Oakley, showed them to a clean but sparse room with one narrow bed and a washstand. "Supper's at 6, she said. "You'll hear the bell." When she left, Evelyn and Jesse stood awkwardly in the small space. The bed seemed to dominate the room. "I'll sleep on the floor," Jesse said immediately. "Don't be ridiculous. We're both adults. We can share without—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Without what?" His voice carried a note of challenge. "Without anything improper happening," she finished firmly, though her heart was racing. At supper, they sat with other travelers at a long communal table. Jesse spun an easy fiction about their life in Texas, their supposed journey to family, while Evelyn tried to look like the devoted wife under the table. His knee pressed against hers, and she didn't move away. After the meal, there was entertainment in the parlor, a traveling musician with a fiddle and a passable voice. The other guests gathered around, and someone pushed back the furniture for dancing. "Dance with your missus," an older man encouraged Jesse. "Don't see many young couples these days. The war took too many." Jesse stood, extending his hand to Evelyn with a mock formality. "Mrs. Garrett, would you honor me?" She took his hand, letting him lead her to the cleared space. The fiddler struck up a slow waltz, and Jesse pulled her into position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, maintaining proper distance. "I didn't know outlaws could dance," she murmured. "I wasn't always an outlaw," he reminded her. "Had a life before, remember?" They moved together easily, as if they'd done this 100 times. Other couples joined them, but Evelyn was aware only of Jesse, the warmth of his hand through her dress, the way he smelled of leather and soap and something uniquely him. "You're good at this," she said. "The pretending." "Am I pretending?" He spun her gently, pulled her back. "Maybe this is the most honest I've been in years." The words hung between them, dangerous and thrilling. Evelyn met his eyes, saw something there that made her breath catch. The music seemed to slow, the other dancers fading away, until there was nothing but the two of them, moving together in the lamplight. When the song ended, they stood frozen for a moment, still in each other's arms. Then Jesse stepped back, his expression carefully neutral once more. "It's late," he said. "We should retire." Back in their room, the awkwardness returned. Evelyn busied herself with her evening ablutions, while Jesse checked his weapons and studied a map by candlelight. When she finally approached the bed, he was still at the small table. "Jesse, go to sleep. Evelyn, I've got some planning to do." But she couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed, acutely aware of every sound he made, the scratch of his pencil on paper, the whisper of pages turning, his quiet breathing. The moonlight through the window cast his profile in silver, and she found herself studying the lines of his face. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "Sorry." But she didn't look away. "What are you planning?" "Our route. We'll reach Santa Fe in 3 days if we push hard. From there, he shrugged. Options open up. And then you'll leave me there? With your friends? He did look at her then. That's the plan. You'll be safe, can start a new life, become whoever you want to be. What if I don't want a new life? You don't know what you're saying. His voice was flat. You've been through an ordeal. You're not thinking clearly. Don't! She sat up, anger flashing through her. Don't dismiss me like I'm some hysterical female. I know my own mind. Do you? 5 days ago you were the perfect judge's daughter. Now you think you want… what? Life on the run with an outlaw. I want… She paused, searching for words. I want to feel alive, the way I feel out here, with you, not trapped in expectations and propriety and safety, he interrupted, and comfort, and a future that doesn't end with a rope. They glared at each other across the small room. Then Evelyn threw back the covers and crossed to him, standing close enough to touch. I've had safety, she said quietly. I've had comfort. They're cages. Jessie, golden ones, maybe, but still cages. He stood slowly, towering over her in the small space. You don't know what you're asking. Then show me. For a heartbeat. She thought he would push her away. Then his control shattered. His hands framed her face, and his mouth came down on hers with desperate hunger. The kiss was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd experienced at supervised socials. This was fire and need and something wild that matched the landscape they'd been traveling through. She responded instinctively, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Jessie's eyes were dark with desire and something that might have been pain. Evelyn, he warned. I know, she whispered. I know all the reasons this is wrong. I don't care. He kissed her again, softer this time, with aching tenderness. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering to the floor. She pressed against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, wanting more than she had words for. Wait, he said against her mouth. Not like this. Not when you might regret it tomorrow. I won't. You might. He gentled his rejection by keeping her close, resting his forehead against hers. And I won't be another man who takes advantage of you. You deserve better than that. What if I don't want better? What if I want you? He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Then you'll still want me tomorrow. And if you do, we'll talk about what that means. All of it. The danger, the running, the price on my head. No illusions. Evelyn, I won't have you throwing away your life on a romantic fantasy. She wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. This mattered to him. Her choice. Her certainty. It was a kind of respect she'd never experienced from the men in her father's world. All right, she agreed. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Now, go to bed, please, before I forget my good intentions. She returned to the bed, every nerve still singing from his touch. Jessie blew out the candle and finally, reluctantly, joined her, lying carefully on top of the covers, maintaining a careful inch of space between them. In the darkness, she reached out and found his hand. He laced their fingers together, holding tight. Tell me about Santa Fe, she whispered. About your friends there. So he did, his voice low and soothing in the darkness. He told her about Miguel and Isabella Herrera, who ran a small ranch outside the city, about how Miguel had saved his life 3 years ago, patching up a bullet wound and asking no questions. About their children, their simple, happy life far from the violence of the territory wars. They're good people, he said. They'll help you start over, if that's what you want. And if it's not, he was quiet for a long moment. Then we'll figure out something else. Together. It was a promise and a question rolled into one. Evelyn squeezed his hand, her answer clear without words. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever choices lay ahead, she knew with bone-deep certainty that her old life was over. The judge's dutiful daughter was gone, replaced by someone she was only beginning to discover. Outside, a coyote howled at the moon. Inside, two people lay side by side, hands linked, hearts racing with possibilities neither dared fully name. The night stretched ahead, full of promise and danger in equal measure. When Evelyn finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of dancing, not in a boarding house parlor, but under open stars, with no one to see or judge. Just her and Jesse in the vast, wild freedom of the frontier. Morning came too soon, bringing decisions that would shape the rest of their lives. But for now, in this stolen moment between darkness and dawn, they had the warmth of connection, the promise of tomorrow, and the fragile, precious hope that love might be stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. The morning Evelyn left Jesse was the hardest of her life. She woke before dawn, his arm around her waist, his breath warm against her neck. For a long moment, she let herself imagine a different world, one where they could stay like this, where the past didn't matter, where love was enough. But the weight of reality pressed down like a stone. In 3 days, they would reach Santa Fe. Jesse would leave her with his friends and disappear, and she would have to choose between a new life built on lies or returning to face the consequences of her actions. She couldn't do either. Not anymore. Moving carefully to avoid waking him, she slipped from the bed and dressed in silence. Her hands shook as she penned a brief note. "I'm sorry. This is the only way. Please don't follow me. E." She left it on the pillow where her head had been, took one last look at his sleeping face, peaceful in a way she'd never seen him while awake, and slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The horse Jesse had bought for her in the last town was saddled and ready. She'd prepared everything the night before while he slept. She mounted quickly, tears blurring her vision, and rode hard toward the east, toward home, toward a reckoning she could no longer avoid. By the time Jesse woke to find her gone, she was miles away, the rising sun at her back and her heart breaking with every hoofbeat. It took her 4 days to reach Willow Creek, 4 days of hard riding and harder thinking. She avoided the main roads, camping rough, living on the supplies Jesse had taught her to pack. Every skill he'd shared, every lesson about survival, now served to take her further from him. When the familiar outline of the town appeared on the horizon, her courage nearly failed. But she thought of Tom Larkin, of Jesse's friends still in danger, of the cycle of violence that would continue unless someone stood up to break it. She rode directly to the courthouse, where a crowd had already gathered. News of her return had spread like wildfire. She saw faces she'd known all her life, some sympathetic, others hostile, all curious about the judge's daughter who'd been kidnapped by outlaws, or so they thought. Marshal Holt was waiting on the courthouse steps, his hand resting on his pistol. "Miss Maddox," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "We've been worried about you. I need to see my father," she said, dismounting with as much dignity as she could muster. "He's inside, but first, I'll need to ask you some questions about Jesse Crow. Where is he? Did he hurt you?" "No," she said firmly. "He didn't hurt me. As for where he is," she met Holt's eyes steadily. "I escaped while he slept. I don't know where he went after that." It was partially true, which made the lie easier to sell. Holt's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside. "Your father's in his chambers. He's not been well since you disappeared." She found Judge Maddox at his desk, looking older than she'd ever seen him. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Relief, anger, disappointment, all warring for dominance. "Evelyn." He stood slowly. "Are you unharmed?" "I'm fine. Father, that outlaw, did he—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Jesse Crow saved my life," she said clearly. "Multiple times. He protected me from bounty hunters who would have used me against you. He was nothing but respectful and honorable." Her father's face darkened. "Honorable? He's a criminal. Evelyn, a killer." "Is he? Or is he just a man trying to survive in a world where the law serves only those with power?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "Tell me, Father, do you know who really killed Samuel Henderson? Tom Larkin killed, Jake Morrison killed Henderson, she interrupted. Over a gambling debt. Morrison, who works for Marshal Holt as an informant, but it was easier to blame Tom, wasn't it? Cleaner. Better for Holt's war against the Crow gang. Judge Maddox sank back into his chair. You've been listening to an outlaw's lies. Have I? Then investigate it. Really investigate it. Not just accept Holt's version. Be the man of justice you've always claimed to be. They stared at each other across the desk that had witnessed so many judgments, so many sentences pronounced with absolute certainty. Even if what you say is true, her father said finally. It doesn't change what Jesse Crow is. He's robbed stages, stolen cattle, shot men who stood against him. Men who were trying to kill him first. Men hired by the big ranchers to drive out small farmers. Men like Holt's deputies, who shoot first and claim self-defense later. Evelyn leaned forward. I'm not saying Jesse Crow is innocent. I'm saying the law that condemned him isn't just... The law is all we have between civilization and chaos. Then maybe we need better law. Law that protects everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful. Judge Maddox stood abruptly. You're not yourself. That man has filled your head with radical notions. You need rest, time to recover from your ordeal. My ordeal? Evelyn laughed bitterly. My ordeal opened my eyes. Father, for the first time in my life, I saw how the other half lives, how they struggle and survive and help each other because the system we uphold offers them nothing but judgment. Enough! Her father's voice rang with the authority of the bench. You'll go home. You'll rest. And you'll speak no more of this nonsense. I'll not have my daughter spouting outlaw propaganda. Your daughter? Evelyn stood as well, matching his steel with her own. Since when have I been anything more to you than an extension of your reputation? A prop in your perfect world of order and obedience? How dare you? I dare because I have nothing left to lose. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. I'll go home. Father, but this isn't over. I'll testify at the next trial, not the lies Holt wants, but the truth, all of it. She left him standing there, mouth open in shock, and walked through the courthouse with her head high. Outside, a crowd had gathered, eager for gossip about the judge's daughter and her outlaw captor. She ignored them all. Mounting her horse and riding to the family mansion, Mrs. Donnelly greeted her with tears and embraces, fussing over her appearance and insisting on drawing a bath. Evelyn submitted to the ministrations, grateful for the housekeeper's familiar kindness. But that night, alone in her room, the same room where she'd watched Tom Larkin's hanging preparation, the weight of her decision crashed down. She'd left Jesse to protect him, to prevent him from trading his life for her safety. But had she only made things worse? The next days passed in a blur. Her father barely spoke to her, communicating through Mrs. Donnelly when necessary. The town buzzed with speculation. Some painted her as a victim of Stockholm Syndrome. Others whispered darker theories about the judge's daughter and the outlaw. Marshal Holt visited daily, pressing for information about Jesse's hideouts, his plans, his associates. Evelyn gave him nothing, repeating only that Jesse had treated her well and that she'd escaped on her own. You're protecting him, Holt accused during one particularly intense session. I'm telling the truth, she replied calmly. If that protects him, perhaps you should ask yourself why. On the fourth night, she heard pebbles against her window. Her heart leaped, hoping against hope. But when she looked out, it was Deputy Briggs, his arm still in a sling from Jesse's bullet. Miss Maddox, he whispered urgently. I need to speak with you. About that night at the safe house. She slipped out through the garden, meeting him in the shadows of the cottonwood trees. I've been thinking, Briggs said without preamble. About what Crow said, about Marshal Holt setting you up, and about some things I've seen and heard since then. What things? Morrison's been flashing a lot of money around, more than an informant's pay would account for. And there's talk that Henderson had something on him, was threatening to expose his connection to Holt. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Would you testify to that? Briggs shifted uncomfortably. Going against Holt, That's dangerous territory. Miss, but if what Crow said is true, if Tom Larkin died for Morrison's crime, then you'd be serving real justice, not Holt's version of it. He nodded slowly. I'll think on it. But, Miss, you should know. Holt's planning something. I heard him talking about using you as bait again, trying to draw Crow out. Jesse won't come, she said with more confidence than she felt. He's too smart for that. Maybe, but Holt's getting desperate. The territorial governor's been asking questions about his methods, about the body count. He needs a big win, and bringing in Jesse Crow would give him that. After Briggs left, Evelyn paced her room, mind racing. She'd thought leaving Jesse would keep him safe, but instead, she'd become an even more valuable pawn in Holt's game. The Marshal would use her father's influence, her presence in town, to set a trap Jesse might not be able to resist. She had to warn him somehow. But how? She was watched constantly, her movements restricted to the house and garden. Her father had made it clear that any attempt to leave town would be met with force for her own protection. Of course, the next morning brought unexpected news. A letter arrived from the territorial capital. The governor was sending a special prosecutor to investigate irregularities in recent trials. Several prominent citizens had raised concerns about rushed judgments and questionable evidence. Judge Maddox's face was grave as he read the letter at breakfast. It seems our methods are being questioned, he said, not looking at Evelyn. This prosecutor will want to interview you about your experience. Good, Evelyn said simply. I have a great deal to tell him. Her father's hand clenched around his coffee cup. You will say nothing that brings shame on this family or questions the integrity of this court. I'll tell the truth. Father, isn't that what justice is supposed to be about? They glared at each other across the breakfast table, the battle lines clearly drawn. But before either could speak again, Mrs. Donnelly burst in, face flushed with excitement. Judge, Miss Marshal Holt's here with a prisoner. Says he's caught one of Jesse Crow's top men. They're bringing him to the jail now. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Who had they caught? And more importantly, what would Jesse do when he learned one of his men was facing the same fate as Tom Larkin? She had her answer that night when she found a note slipped under her door, written in a hand she didn't recognize. If you want to prevent another hanging, come to the old mission at midnight. Come alone, a friend. It could be a trap. Probably was a trap. But if there was any chance it was connected to Jesse, any chance she could prevent another death, she had to go. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the morning of the trial. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding outside to peer through windows. The territorial prosecutor, a thin man named Harrison Westbrook, sat at one table reviewing his notes. At the other, Marshal Holt conferred with the local prosecutor, both men radiating confidence. In the defendant's chair sat Will Tucker, one of Jesse's men, his face bearing fresh bruises from his capture. His eyes found Evelyn in the witness section, and she saw resignation there, the look of a man who knew his fate was already decided. Judge Cornelius Maddox entered in his black robes, the crowd rising reflexively. But Evelyn noticed something different about her father, a tremor in his hands, uncertainty in his bearing. The arrival of the territorial prosecutor had shaken him. This court is now in session, Judge Maddox intoned, though his voice lacked its usual authority. The territory versus William Tucker, charged with robbery, conspiracy, and murder. The prosecution's case was swift and damning. Marshal Holt testified about Tucker's known association with the Crow gang, about robberies attributed to them, about the general lawlessness they represented. Other witnesses, shopkeepers and ranchers, spoke of fear and intimidation, but when Westbrook rose to cross-examine, the narrative began to fray. Marshal Holt, Westbrook said in his precise Eastern accent, you state that Mr. Tucker was present at the Hendricks Ranch robbery. What evidence places him there specifically? Common knowledge, Holt replied. The Crow gang. I asked about Mr. Tucker specifically, not the gang in general. Holt shifted uncomfortably. Witnesses saw masked riders. Tucker runs with Crow. Stands to reason. Stands to reason is not evidence. Marshal, do you have any witness who can identify Mr. Tucker specifically? The questioning continued in this vein, Westbrook methodically dismantling assumptions and revealing the thin evidence beneath. Evelyn watched her father growing increasingly agitated as his courtroom turned into a battleground he couldn't control. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The defense calls Miss Evelyn Maddox. A murmur ran through the crowd as Evelyn rose. She could feel the weight of every eye upon her, her father's most of all. She took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Miss Maddox, Westbrook began gently, you recently spent time as a captive of Jesse Crow. Is that correct? I was under his protection. Yes. Another murmur. Holt half rose from his seat. Objection to the characterization. Overruled. Judge Maddox said quietly, surprising everyone, including himself. During your time with Mr. Crow, Westbrook continued, did you come to know the defendant, William Tucker? Yes, Will helped ensure my safety on several occasions. Was he violent toward you? Never. He was respectful and kind. He spoke often of his family, his hope to save enough money to bring them west. Miss Maddox, the local prosecutor interrupted, rising for cross-examination. You were held against your will, were you not? Perhaps you're suffering from confusion about your captor's true nature. Evelyn met his gaze steadily. I am not confused. I was initially frightened. Yes, but I came to understand that Jesse Crow took me from that safe house to protect me from those who would use me as bait, much as Marshal Holt is attempting to do now. The courtroom erupted. Judge Maddox pounded his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. When quiet finally returned, Evelyn continued. Furthermore, I have reason to believe that the man truly responsible for Samuel Henderson's death is Jake Morrison, who has been seen spending large sums of money recently. Money that might have come from Henderson's safe. Objection. Holt was on his feet. The witness is speculating. Then investigate it. Evelyn shot back. Or are you afraid of what you might find about your own informant? What followed was chaos. Accusations flew, the crowd took sides, and Judge Maddox seemed to age years and minutes as he struggled to maintain control. Finally, he called for a recess, fleeing to his chambers. Evelyn found herself surrounded immediately, some calling her brave, others whispering traitor and worse. She pushed through them all, seeking fresh air. Outside, she nearly collided with Deputy Briggs. You did it, he said quietly. You actually said it all in open court. Someone had to. It's going to get ugly now. Miss Holt won't take this lying down. And your father... I know. She looked back at the courthouse. But at least now it's in the open. The territorial prosecutor will have to investigate. That evening, the Maddox house was like a tomb. Judge Maddox had locked himself in his study, refusing dinner. Evelyn sat in the parlor, pretending to read but really listening to the sounds of the town, still buzzing with the day's revelations. Near midnight, her father finally emerged. He looked haggard, defeated in a way she'd never seen. You've destroyed everything, he said quietly. My reputation, my life's work, all of it. I told the truth. The truth? He laughed bitterly. The truth is that we're trying to build civilization in a wilderness. Sometimes that requires hard choices, compromises, like hanging innocent men. He flinched. I believe the evidence presented to me. Because you wanted to believe it. Because it was easier than asking hard questions. Evelyn stood, facing him. How many others? Father, how many Tom Larkins have there been? Get out, he said suddenly. Pack your things and get out of my house. You're no daughter of mine. The words hit like physical blows. But Evelyn had expected them. She'd known the price of her testimony. Where would you have me go? I don't care. To your outlaw lover. Perhaps you've chosen him over your own family. I've chosen justice over injustice. That used to be what this family stood for. She packed quickly, taking only essentials. Mrs. Donnelly wept as she left, pressing a small purse of money into her hands. You did right, child. the housekeeper whispered. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Evelyn had no clear destination, only a vague notion of finding a boarding house for the night. But as she walked through the dark streets, she became aware of footsteps following her. She quickened her pace, hand moving to the small pistol Jesse had taught her to use. "Miss Maddox." Marshal Holt stepped out of an alley, blocking her path. "Leaving town? I can't allow that." "On what authority? I'm not under arrest." "Not yet, but after today's performance, I think we need to discuss your recent activities. Aiding and abetting known criminals, for instance." Two more men emerged from the shadows. Holt's deputies, hands on their guns. Evelyn's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "The whole town saw me enter the courthouse this morning. If something happens to me..." "Who says anything's going to happen? We're just going to have a conversation." Holt smiled coldly. "About where Jesse Crow might be hiding. You're going to help us find him, one way or another." Before Evelyn could respond, a shot rang out. One of the deputies cried out, clutching his shoulder. "From the rooftops!" A familiar voice called down. "Let her go! Holt, this is between you and me!" Jessie, her heart leapt even as terror gripped her. He'd come back, walked right into the trap she'd tried to prevent. "Crow!" Holt drew his gun, scanning the roof lines. "Show yourself. First, your men step away from the lady. She walks out of here free and clear. No deal. She's..." Another shot, this one taking the hat off Holt's head. That was a warning. "Next one won't be..." "Let her go." Holt gestured angrily to his men, who backed away. Evelyn stood frozen, torn between running and staying. "Go, Evelyn," Jesse called. "Get to safety." "Jesse, go!" She ran, but not far. Ducking into a doorway, she watched as Jesse emerged on the roof of the hardware store, rifle trained on Holt. Even in the moonlight, she could see the tension in his body, the careful control. "You want me, Holt? Here I am, but we do this fair. You and me, right here, right now. Winner walks away. You're under arrest. I'm offering you a chance to take me down, legal-like, in front of witnesses." Jesse gestured to the windows where townspeople were beginning to peer out, drawn by the gunfire. "Unless you're afraid to face me without your boys backing you up." It was a clever trap. Holt's reputation, already damaged by the day's testimony, couldn't survive backing down from such a public challenge. He holstered his gun, stepped into the middle of the street. "Come down then. Let's finish this." Jesse descended, moving with the easy grace Evelyn remembered. They faced each other in the dusty street. Two men who'd been circling each other for years, finally come to the moment of reckoning. "You killed a lot of good men," Holt said. "I defended myself against men you sent to kill me." Jesse corrected. "There's a difference. Not in the eyes of the law. Your law, not justice." They stood perhaps 20 feet apart, hands hovering near their guns. The town held its breath. Evelyn pressed her fist to her mouth, praying to any power that might listen. Then, from the courthouse steps, a voice rang out. "Stop! In the name of the territorial authority!" Prosecutor Westbrook strode forward, flanked by federal marshals. "Marshal Holt, you're under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and perversion of justice. Mr. Crow, you will surrender yourself to my custody pending a full investigation of all charges." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Holt's hand flashed toward his gun. Jesse was faster, but his shot went wide, intentionally missing. The federal marshals had no such compunctions. Holt spun and fell, clutching his arm. "It's over," Westbrook announced to the growing crowd. "There will be a full investigation. Fair trials for all. The rule of law returns to Willow Creek." Jesse stood with his hands raised as the federal marshals approached. His eyes found Evelyn across the square, and something passed between them. Understanding, regret, and something deeper. "I'll testify," she called out. "To everything. The truth about Tom Larkin, about the gang, about why Jesse Crow became what he is." Westbrook nodded approvingly. "Your testimony will be valuable, Miss Maddox, as will yours." Mr. Crow, if you're willing." "I've got nothing to hide," Jesse said, allowing himself to be disarmed. "Not anymore." As they led him away, he passed close to where Evelyn stood. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for believing in justice, for believing in me." "This isn't over," she promised. "No," he agreed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "It's just beginning." The crowd parted as they took him to jail. Not the harsh capture of a dangerous outlaw, but the civilized arrest of a man who would finally have his day in court. Real court, with real justice. Evelyn stood in the street long after everyone else had dispersed, staring at the jail where Jesse was held. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, testimony to give, truths to reveal, a system to change. She had no home now, no family except what she might build for herself. But she had something more valuable, purpose. And somewhere in that jail, she had a man who'd taught her that justice and law weren't always the same thing, but that they could be. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but Evelyn took comfort in them anyway. They were the same stars she'd slept under with Jesse, the same ones that would shine regardless of what tomorrow brought. She squared her shoulders and walked toward the boarding house, ready to begin the long fight for true justice. And maybe, just maybe, for love. The Willow Creek jail had never held a prisoner who drew such crowds. From dawn to dusk, people gathered outside. Some calling Jesse Crow a hero, others demanding swift justice. Inside, Jesse sat quietly in his cell, refusing most visitors, waiting for whatever came next. Evelyn was one of the few he would see. She came every day, bringing food from the boarding house, books to pass the time, and news from the outside world. The federal investigation was moving quickly, uncovering a web of corruption that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Morrison broke, she told him on the 4th day. Confessed to killing Henderson, said Holt promised to protect him if he blamed it on Tom. Jesse nodded slowly. Tom's name will be cleared, then, posthumously. The word tasted bitter. It doesn't bring him back. No, but maybe it saves the next Tom Larkin. They sat in companionable silence. The bars between them both everything and nothing. Deputy Briggs, who'd been appointed temporary sheriff after Holt's arrest, allowed them privacy, understanding perhaps better than most the complicated nature of justice. On the 7th day, Prosecutor Westbrook arrived with news. "Mr. Crow, I've completed my initial investigation. While there are certainly charges to answer for, robbery, theft of livestock, I find no evidence of murder that would stand in a fair court. More importantly, I find considerable evidence of self-defense in the shootings attributed to you." Jesse's expression didn't change. "What does that mean?" "It means, with the right cooperation, you might avoid the rope, perhaps even avoid significant prison time. But I need your help building cases against the larger corruption, the big ranchers who hired guns to drive out settlers, the mining companies that worked men to death and paid off judges to look the other way. And if I refuse, then you'll face trial for the crimes we can prove, and take your chances with a jury." Evelyn leaned forward. "He'll help, won't you, Jesse?" Jesse met her eyes, seeing there something that made his decision. "I'll need guarantees for my men who weren't involved in violence. They're just trying to survive." "I can work with that." Westbrook agreed. "Miss Maddox, I'll need your continued testimony as well. Your insights into both sides of this conflict have proven invaluable." After Westbrook left, Evelyn and Jesse sat facing each other through the bars. "You shouldn't be here," Jesse said quietly. "Shouldn't tie yourself to me. Your reputation is already ruined." Evelyn finished. "And I don't care. I made my choice. Jesse, I chose truth over comfort, justice over family approval. I chose you." He reached through the bars, taking her hands. "I can't offer you anything. Even if I avoid hanging, I'll likely serve time. Years, maybe. You deserve better than waiting for a jailbird. Then I'll wait, or I'll build a life nearby. or I'll do whatever needs doing, because this—" She squeezed his hands. "This is real, more real than anything I had before. Evelyn." "No, you don't get to push me away from my own good. Not anymore. We're in this together, remember? Whatever comes." That night, violence came. Evelyn woke in her boarding house room to the sound of breaking glass and shouting. The window of her room exploded inward as a rock sailed through, wrapped in paper, with shaking hands. She unfolded the message. "Traitor whore, leave town or burn with your outlaw." Outside, she could see torches gathering. Some of Holt's supporters, drunk on whiskey and rage, had decided to take justice into their own hands. She dressed quickly, grabbing the pistol Jesse had given her. Mrs. Oakley, the boarding house proprietor, met her in the hallway. "Out the back, dear, quickly now." But Evelyn shook her head. "They'll go for the jail. For Jesse." She ran through the dark streets, the mob's roar growing louder behind her. At the jail, she found Deputy Briggs and 2 federal marshals already positioned, rifles ready. "Get inside, Miss Maddox," Briggs ordered. "Let me talk to them." "Inside." She found Jesse on his feet, alert and ready despite being weaponless in his cell. "What's happening?" "Mob, Holt's people." She pressed against the bars. "Briggs won't be able to hold them." "He won't have to." Jesse's voice was calm. "Federal troops are camped just outside town. Westbrook's not stupid. He knew something like this might happen." Sure enough, within minutes the sound of cavalry echoed through the streets. The mob, faced with trained soldiers instead of a handful of lawmen, melted away into the night, but the damage was done in other ways. The next morning, Judge Maddox suffered a collapse, the strain of the investigation and his daughter's public betrayal finally breaking him. Evelyn rushed to the house she'd been banished from, finding her father pale and struggling to breathe. "Don't," he wheezed as she knelt beside his bed. "Didn't call for you. I know, but I'm here anyway." She took his hand, feeling how thin it had become. "I'm still your daughter, whether you acknowledge it or not." "Doctor." Hartwell arrived, examining the judge with gentle efficiency. "His heart," he told Evelyn quietly. "The strain. He needs rest, quiet, no more stress." For 3 days, Evelyn kept vigil. She read to her father from his law books, brought him broth he barely touched, and waited for some sign of forgiveness that never came. On the 3rd night, he finally spoke. "I tried to do right," he whispered. "By the law, by society." "I know, Father." "But the law serves those who write it. I see that now." His eyes, clouded with pain, found hers. Perhaps you were right to question." "Rest, Father. Don't strain yourself." "The house, it's yours. The accounts, everything. Your mother. She would have understood you better than I." He closed his eyes. She always saw the people behind the law. Judge Cornelius Maddox died at dawn, his daughter's hand in his. The town that had once revered him now didn't know how to mourn him. Was he a symbol of corrupted justice, or a man trying his best in impossible circumstances? Evelyn arranged a simple funeral. Few attended, but those who did included surprising faces, settlers who'd received fair judgments, women he'd helped when their husbands abandoned them, even a few former outlaws who'd found second chances in his court. Jesse, under heavy guard, was allowed to attend. He stood beside Evelyn as they lowered the coffin, his presence both scandalous and oddly right. "He wasn't a bad man," Jesse said quietly. "Just caught in a bad system." "He was my father," Evelyn replied. "That's all that matters now." The investigation continued through the winter. One by one, the truth emerged. Bribes paid, evidence manufactured. Innocents condemned while the guilty prospered. Prosecutor Westbrook built his cases methodically, with Jesse and Evelyn as his star witnesses. Jesse testified to everything. The robberies, yes, but also the reasons behind them. The families starving because the big ranchers had seized their water rights. The miners dying of preventable diseases while owners lived in eastern mansions. The system that criminalized poverty while protecting wealth. Evelyn testified to her father's genuine belief in the law, but also to the blindness such belief could create. She spoke of Tom Larkin's fear, of Jesse's unexpected honor, of a justice that transcended legal codes. Through it all, they had stolen moments together, a touch of hands during recess, quiet conversations in the jail where their futures seemed both impossible and inevitable, plans made and remade as circumstances shifted. "When this is over," Jesse said one evening, "I'll have to go away for a while. Prison, most likely. Westbrook says maybe only 2 years with good behavior, but then I'll be here when you get out." Evelyn interrupted. "You could do better. We'll do better. Some Eastern-educated man who'll give you the life you deserve. Jesse Crow, if you try to noble your way out of this relationship one more time, I swear I'll shoot you myself." He laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "Yes, ma'am." The trials concluded in spring. Jake Morrison hung for Henderson's murder. Several of Holt's deputies received prison sentences. Holt himself got 20 years for corruption and conspiracy. The big ranchers faced fines and restrictions, though Evelyn knew it wasn't enough. It never would be enough to balance the scales. Jesse received 5 years, reduced to 2 for his cooperation. His men who'd avoided violence were pardoned. It was more than they dared hope, less than true justice demanded. On his last night before being transferred to the territorial prison, Evelyn was allowed a final visit. They sat on opposite sides of the bars, hands clasped, foreheads nearly touching. 2 years, she said. "I can manage 2 years." "You shouldn't have to. You should be free to—" She silenced him with a kiss through the bars. Awkward but heartfelt. "I am free to choose, and I choose you, Jesse Crow. Today, in 2 years, in 20, if that's what it takes." "I love you," he said, the words seeming surprised out of him. "I should have said it before, but I love you. Evelyn." "I know." She smiled through her tears. "I love you too. Now stop trying to talk me out of it." They held each other as best they could until Briggs came to say time was up. Jesse pressed something into her hand, a small carved wooden bird he'd made during his months in jail. "So you remember," he said, "that there's freedom even in cages." "I'll remember everything," she promised. As they led him away, Jesse looked back once, his eyes holding promises that no bars could contain. Evelyn stood until he was out of sight, then walked out into the dawn of a new day. She had a house to run, a life to build, a man to wait for. The judge's daughter was gone, but in her place stood something stronger, a woman who understood that justice and mercy were not opposites, but partners, that love could bloom even in the harshest ground. 2 years, she could do 2 years, and when Jesse Crow walked free, she'd be there, ready for whatever came next. The Wild West was changing, civilization creeping in, but there would always be room for those who chose their own paths. Evelyn Maddox had made her choice. Now she would live it. The mountain air in Colorado was thin and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of snow even in early autumn. Evelyn stood on the porch of their small cabin, watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and rose. 2 years had become 5, then 7, as they built their life in this quiet valley far from the chaos of their past. Jesse emerged from the barn, bucket in hand, having finished the morning milking. His hair had grown longer, touched with silver now at the temples, and the harsh lines of his face had softened into something approaching peace. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, no longer looking over his shoulder for pursuers who would never come. "Sarah's giving more milk every day," he said, setting the bucket on the porch. "We might need to think about getting another cow soon." Evelyn smiled, still amazed sometimes at how domestic their life had become. The feared outlaw, Jesse Crow, discussing livestock like any other rancher. "We'll need the milk," she said, placing a hand on her swelling belly. "Especially come spring." Jesse's face lit up as it always did when she mentioned the baby. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands joining hers over the gentle curve. "How are you feeling this morning?" Better, the sickness seems to be passing. She leaned back against him, savoring his warmth. I was thinking I might work on my journal today. The journal had begun as simple record-keeping, but had grown into something more, a chronicle of their unlikely love story, of justice found in unexpected places, of two people who'd chosen each other against all odds. Evelyn wrote in it daily, preserving memories she never wanted to lose. Inside their cabin, simple but cozy, she settled at the rough-hewn desk Jesse had built for her. Through the window, she could see him working on expanding the chicken coop, preparing for the growing family they'd always dreamed of but hadn't dared hope for until recently. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. October 15th, 1892. 7 years since that night Jesse took me from the Marshal's safe house. 7 years since my life truly began. The story poured out of her, not for the first time, but with new perspective each time she told it. How Marshal Holt had received his comeuppance, dying in prison after only 3 years, his body unable to withstand the confinement he'd inflicted on so many others. How Deputy Briggs had become a respected sheriff, bringing real justice to Willow Creek. How Jesse's surviving men had scattered to the winds, some finding honest work, others disappearing into Mexico, all given the second chance Tom Larkin never got. She wrote about the 2 years of waiting while Jesse served his reduced sentence, how she'd sold the judge's mansion and used the money to help families Holt's corruption had destroyed, how she'd corresponded with Jesse weekly, their letters becoming increasingly intimate, planning a future that seemed impossibly distant but gradually drew closer. She wrote about the day he'd walked free, thinner but unbroken, and how she'd been there waiting as promised. Their quiet wedding in a small chapel in Santa Fe, witnessed only by Miguel and Isabella Herrera and their children. The decision to leave New Mexico entirely, to find somewhere they could truly start fresh. And she wrote about the letter that had arrived 6 months ago, the one that had given her the courage to finally contact one person from her old life, as if summoned by her thoughts. She heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw 2 riders navigating the narrow trail that led to their valley. Her heart jumped, then settled as she recognized the lead figure, tall, straight-backed despite his years, wearing the simple clothes of a retired lawman rather than the severe black suits of a judge. "Jesse," she called. "He's here." Jesse emerged from the coop, wiping his hands on his pants, wariness flickering across his features before he consciously relaxed. Old habits died hard, even after years of peace. The riders dismounted in the yard. The first was indeed Marcus Holt, not the corrupt Marshal, but his older brother, the one member of the family who'd spoken out against the Marshal's methods. The years had been kind to him. Retirement from the bench suited him. Beside him stood a younger man Evelyn didn't recognize. "Judge Holt," Evelyn greeted, stepping onto the porch. "Welcome to our home." "Just Marcus now," he corrected gently, his eyes taking in her obvious pregnancy with grandfatherly approval. "And this is Thomas Larkin, Jr., Tom's younger brother." Evelyn's breath caught. The resemblance was there, the same sandy hair, the same earnest eyes, but this Tom stood straight and confident, unmarked by the fear that had defined his brother's final moments. "Ma'am," Thomas said, removing his hat. "Mr. Crow, I've wanted to meet you both for some time." Jesse stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a spooked horse. "Your brother was a good man. I'm sorry we couldn't save him." "You cleared his name," Thomas replied. "That matters. My family can hold our heads up now, knowing he died innocent." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I came to thank you, both of you, and to tell you that I'm starting law school next year. Real law. The kind that protects everyone, not just the powerful." They invited their guests inside, Evelyn serving coffee and the apple pie she'd baked that morning. The conversation was stilted at first, too much history, too much pain between them all. But gradually, they found common ground. Marcus spoke of the changes in the legal system, the reforms inspired partly by the Willow Creek trials. Thomas talked about his plans to become a defender of the accused, to ensure no one else suffered his brother's fate. Jesse, usually taciturn around strangers, found himself drawn into discussions about justice and mercy, law and ethics. "Your father would be proud," Marcus told Evelyn at one point. "Not of the judge he was, perhaps, but of the woman you've become. He saw the truth in the end, even if he couldn't fully accept it." As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, their guests prepared to leave. Thomas shook Jesse's hand firmly, then surprised them all by embracing Evelyn gently. "My brother wrote about you in his last letter," he said quietly. "Said you looked at him with kindness when everyone else saw only an outlaw. That meant everything to him. Means everything to us." After they'd gone, Jesse and Evelyn stood together on the porch, watching the riders disappear into the gathering dusk. The past had visited them today, but it no longer held them captive. "Do you ever regret it?" Jesse asked suddenly. "The life you gave up, the comfort you could have had." Evelyn turned in his arms, framing his scarred face with her hands. "I gave up a cage," she said firmly. "What I found was freedom. Was you. Was this—" She gestured to their small but perfect world, the cabin, the mountains, the life growing inside her. That night, as they lay in their bed listening to coyotes sing to the moon, Evelyn felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like bird wings against her ribs. She gasped, grabbing Jesse's hand and placing it where she'd felt the movement. They waited, breathing suspended, until it came again, stronger this time, unmistakable. Jesse's eyes widened with wonder, and Evelyn saw tears gather there. "Our child," he whispered. "Our child," she confirmed. "Born free, born to parents who chose each other, who chose love over law, truth over comfort." Jesse pulled her close, and she felt his tears dampen her hair. This hard man who'd faced down death countless times, undone by the miracle of new life. She held him as he'd once held her, offering comfort and strength and the promise of tomorrow. Outside, snow began to fall, early even for the mountains, blanketing their valley in pristine white. By morning, their world would be transformed, made new and clean. But inside their cabin, warmed by fire and love and hope, they were already complete. Evelyn thought of the girl she'd been, watching from her father's window as the world passed by. That girl could never have imagined this life, could never have dreamed that happiness lay not in safety, but in choosing danger, not in comfort, but in struggle, not in solitude, but in the arms of a man the world had called outlaw. She thought of Jesse as she'd first seen him, dangerous and desperate, fighting against a system that offered him no justice. That man had been transformed too, not by prison or punishment, but by love, by being seen and chosen and trusted. They had rewritten their stories, both of them, had refused the roles society assigned and created something new, something theirs. It hadn't been easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But here, in their mountain sanctuary, with snow falling soft outside and new life stirring within, Evelyn knew with bone-deep certainty that every choice had been right. "I love you, Jesse Crow," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you, Evelyn Crow," he replied, the name still sending a thrill through her, forever and always. The snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, hiding them from any who might still seek them. But no one was looking anymore. The outlaw and the judge's daughter had vanished into legend, replaced by a rancher and his wife, soon to be parents, living proof that love could indeed conquer all. In her journal the next morning, Evelyn would write, "He was danger, but he never hurt me, and in his arms, I was finally safe." It was the truest thing she'd ever written. The baby kicked again, strong and sure, and Evelyn smiled. Somewhere out there, Thomas Larkin, Jr. was studying law, determined to bring real justice to the frontier. Somewhere, other young women were questioning the cages of propriety and expectation. Somewhere, other outlaws were discovering that redemption was possible, that the past didn't have to define the future. Their story was ending, but its echoes would ripple outward, touching lives they'd never know. And here, in their snow-covered valley, Jesse and Evelyn Crow would raise their children to understand that true justice lived not in law books, but in human hearts, that love was the greatest rebellion of all, and that sometimes the most dangerous choice was the only one worth making. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-covered world in shades of gold and promise. A new day in a new world, built by two people who dared to choose each other over everything else. And they lived, not happily ever after, but honestly, ever after, which, in the end, was so much better. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel if you enjoyed this story. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about Evelyn and Jesse's journey. Did their love story touch your heart as much as it touched mine? Share your feelings in the comments.